I'm excited. I'm joining you from the state of Florida here in the US. And I want to make a disclaimer before we go into this session that this session is not meant to diagnose or treat anyone. It's educational purposes. And also it's something you can share with your family members or try and implement on your own. But if anyone is here and they're experiencing mental problems or serious medical problems, please seek help. I'm not a mental health expert, but I'm a behavioral change expert. I'm passionate about talking about the issues which are challenging us as a people, especially during this post-COVID era. There's quite a lot of things which we have covered in this space. We've talked about the power of the mind. Last time we're together, and a few people really expressed how they felt they wanted to use their mind better, their brain better. And so this topic, which we are discussing today, how to improve your memory loss, was selected by the people. I posted a poll in the psych therapy group, and there were about at least 18 people who said they wanted to talk about memory. So from now on, we will request from the group through the group link, through a poll, so you can advise us on what topics you want us to cover. So for those of you who've been journeying with us for the past couple of months, you recognize something, that I love to make things simple. If there's a person who likes to simplify life, it's me. I have spent a lot of time in education and health and wellness for years and years and years, and I found out something, that things which used to be simple back in the day are getting harder and harder, even with the technology which we have today. So yes, there's 39 people here, and I'm sure every single one of us have experienced these memory problems, right? So one thing I can assure you is you're going to live here with something. You're going to live here with something which is so simple, and maybe you've heard about these things before. I always make a disclaimer and say, if you hear anything I share for the first time, just say amen. Amen. You can say it loud, you can post, you can raise your hand, or you can talk to yourself, whatever works. And if you hear anything I say here for the second time, I want you to say, God is speaking to me. Type it in the chat box, or tell yourself, or write it down, because definitely there's a message for you here today. If you hear anything I shared today for the third time, I want you to really say, I'm going to take this message seriously and take it home. How many of you are familiar with the health message, the Advent health message? I'm sure most people here have heard about the health message, and they've wondered, how do we plug this in? How can this help us improve our well-being? So today I'm going to make it simple. As you heard, we do have a pathway which is called Rewired, renewed for purpose, for life, and for health, because we made discoveries that things which used to be easy are getting harder and harder and harder for us. And so we are beginning to look at how we can make life simple. So this slide will be shared with anyone who wants to receive it and review it later. Just make sure you join our WhatsApp group. Sister Becky will post it in the chat. That's where we communicate. I think we have about 180 something people in there now. So today's session is going to look at how we can better understand memory. So I kind of put some objectives here and some goals. Objectives is for you to be able to describe what is memory and identify the brain parts and the processes involved, and identify at least 7 ways to improve your own memory, as well as personal strategies which can help you improve your memory. The goal also is that you can connect the dots, so you can begin to also live life thinking differently and making choices. So the whole idea behind Rewired and Renewed is that when we learn some new things, we start thinking differently, and we get renewed because we begin to live life differently, and we identify our purpose, whether that purpose is leadership, or pursuing your career, or improving your relationships, or being a better mother, or finding a new job, or finding your ministry. It's really open here. And so also, I hope that you also make decisions to implement some of these strategies, which I'll share with you today. And I have good news for you. We do have a portal where most of these recordings and handouts are going to be uploaded, and you'll be able to access or invite your friend. And that way you're not constantly looking for information. So memory. I'm sure you can agree with me that at some point you've experienced a situation where you can't find your glasses, your car keys, your glasses, forget your password, can't remember, what we talked about last week in this very space. And you're not alone. You're not the only person who's been forgetting. We all have experienced some episodes of forgetfulness. And so memory challenges are nothing to take lightly, because memory is what helps us relate, right? Most of you heard my name today. You're like, oh, I know her, or do I know her, or who is she? You start connecting in your brain. So this memory function is a function of the mind, which takes data or information and processes it and codes it and stores it and retrieve it when it's needed, right? So as I say, even memory, you're thinking, okay, my grandmother had memory issues. Yes. So memory issues can range from very mild to severe. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So memory has a role to help retain this information over time for the purpose of influencing future actions. So if I ask a question and say, so what's your favorite verse, right? You begin to think. And some of you have more than one. And some people might say, I need to get my Bible to read my favorite verse so I don't say it the wrong way. And that's the purpose of memory, for us to relate to our environment, to be able to retain information so that we can make decisions and actions. So it's very important. So memory, if we didn't have memory, anything we've done in the past wouldn't really be meaningful. So if we couldn't remember our names from when we were little, or our address, or our surnames, or where we reside, or how to add on, how to subtract, it's impossible for us to develop language, relationships, personal identity also to develop. So for some of you who are here who said, oh, well, I want to know a little more about how to improve my self-esteem, or I want to be able to pursue a better career or to become a better leader, you have to begin here to say, what is it that I need to remember? Even those who are saying, oh, I need to improve my relationships, or I want to get married, or I want to take care of my children, or relate to my husband and children better, or my parents better, you need to begin here. You need to remember certain things because it matters. It matters not just as we communicate, but it also matters as we develop our own personal identity as well as our pathways, right? So memory is very important. Memory is also usually described as forgetfulness or amnesia. Usually, if you just forget to take your pills, or forget to write something, or forget you have an appointment, or forget that this session is on every Sunday, it's called forgetfulness. However, if a person is not able to recognize maybe their daughter, their son, or recognize a pen or a spoon, sometimes they'll say amnesia. That's like memory loss, right? So this is a spectrum of a function of the mind. I want to talk a little bit about what really brings about memory. So I have a slide here, and I might not really read what's on the slide, but I want to make it simple for someone here. Someone who's beginning to think, well, I've been forgetting and I'm getting a little more forgetful, or I'm losing interest in certain things because I don't remember. I've heard in this very room, someone said, I will be praying and I forget while I'm praying. And it's common. So this information processing is a little complex, right? It's made reference to as explicit and implicit. That is made up of sensory processor, right? You all have a phone. Most of you have a computer. Most of you have a food processor. Processor is needed to make sense of information, right? So that processing system has to be intact. And then we have short-term memory, which is working memory. If I ask a question right now and I say, can you raise your hand if you know what the topic is today, that's short-term memory, right? But when we come back next week here and I say, so what did we talk about last week? That's long-term memory. And so I used to tell a lot of children stories in the church at some point, and I noticed something, that every week when the children's story was told, people forgot it. So I would say, so what, who said this, who told the children's story last week? And people would look around and like, why is she asking that? And I would ask, what was it about? And everybody was like, I don't know. And at some point, nobody really remembered the children's story from the church I used to go to. Until now, every time I'm up there to tell the story, they'll start asking each other, what was the title last week? Because they were expecting that I was going to ask it. And so it actually helped people relate with the information, and also made them more alert. So level of alertness matters. Like, you're all listening to me right now. I might be talking a little fast, but you're hearing my voice. So at some point during this presentation, you're going to learn something new. So you can either write that down right away, or you can connect it with something which is meaningful to you. So this whole process takes physical body parts, the brain, right? Most of you know that. So I want to talk about how all this gets to happen, right? It's like electrical wires. They're called neurons, these nerves, these little fibers. These fibers carry messages. They are like information messengers. And they use electrical impulses and chemical signals to transmit information between different areas of the brain. Not only different areas of the brain, also between the brain and the senses of our body. Very, very important. So for instance, if you have your eyes closed and you're looking for your phone, you know it's your phone because you're going to feel it. So you're thinking, oh, so these fibers come from the hands too? Yes, they come from the hands, the eyes, the feet, the legs. And I think we talked about this a little bit when we talked about depression at some point. So these fibers are physical. These fibers are covered by a protective layer called myelin sheath. It's like a covering which keeps them healthy and protected. And before I forget, if there's any changes or interruption or distraction of the covering of these fibers, the fibers are slow. It's almost like you have an electric wire and you take the covering off it. It's the opposite. You're going to get shocked. But these fibers, it's the opposite. They get slower. And so most of you are thinking, oh, is that what happens when somebody has Parkinson's disease? Yes. If you know anybody who's got Parkinson's disease. And I'm spending a little more time on this because I want at the end of the day that every single person here make a decision. How do you care for these fibers? These fibers which cover your whole body from head to toe, including your skin, including your tongue, your teeth, everything, everywhere you feel, smell, taste, touch, sense, get excited is covered. And there's some relevance to this. So that's the physical part. And so you'll find out that when you look at the brain, this whole brain, every single part of the brain is these fibers. That's all there is. And fat in between, and blood circulating in between. That's what is in the brain. And so I might forget to say this at some point. I want you all to remember there's a barrier. It's called the blood-brain barrier, which protects this brain from any toxins which might damage these fibers from entering the brain. However, certain things penetrate this barrier. Things like street drugs or alcohol. That's why when people drink alcohol, they get drunk, because it penetrates this barrier. So where I'm going to land today is how are you going to take care of these fibers and this barrier which protects the brain? Because when we start seeing symptoms of forgetfulness, something is going on in the brain, because these fibers fire or misfire or slow down, right? That's why some people are quick to respond, because they're firing fast. And sometimes it takes a little longer to say, what did you say? Because the fibers which come from the ear have slowed down. So sometimes hearing is impaired. I hope all of you are following me here. So when the fibers send signals, information is processed. So information is processed from the outside world, whether it's through the senses or movement. or chemicals or heat or cold or air or sound, right? So the brain makes sense of this. So you must be thinking, so does it mean then if the processor is receiving too much information, it might not be efficient? Yes. And I'm going to land there today where some people are going to have to make a decision as to what exactly do they want to expose their processor to. Because God made it such that this processor works efficiently when it's taken care of, right? So we have these two things, the physical, which is the nerve, the neuron, which covers the whole body. But in this case, we're talking about the brain. We're not talking about muscles today. And then the sensory processor. Sensory means it gets information from senses. Something is sensing or feeling or experiencing a signal which triggers it. So as I speak to you, my voice is producing sound. And that sound is entering your ear. And as it enters your ear, your fibers in the ear get stimulated by sound. And they take this sound and sends it through the processor to that part of the brain which interprets voices, which interprets meaning. So sometimes it's slow. If you speak a second language, it might take you a little longer because your processor is trying to translate what I'm saying into English because you're used to speaking Spanish or Dutch, because we do have some people here who speak Spanish and Dutch. So the next thing is the short-term memory. Working memory, which serves as the encoding and retrieving component from the processor, and also it retrieves information which was previously stored. A good example is, what did we talk about last week? How does the power of the mind connect with what we're talking about today? So you have to then to say, okay, this is what you talked about last week, and this is what it means. Or if I say, okay, the mind is responsible for emotions, you're like, oh yeah, she talked about that last week. And then the long-term memory is what is mainly focused on stored information. This is usually in categories. The brain categorizes it. So if I say, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo se siente? Someone here will say, oh, she spoke Spanish. Someone are like, what is she talking about, right? If I say, Abushani, somebody here will say, oh, she said good morning, because I kind of know a few languages. I know some words. I don't really speak efficiently, but I know at least 7 languages. So if someone here has not heard about that French word, bonjour, they're like, what is that? But if they've heard it, they recognize it. So you're thinking, oh my goodness. So does it mean it's like a storage bins? Yes. It's just like your dresser, where you put your socks, where you put your undergarments, where you put your t-shirts. Yes. So the brain kind of have these storage compartments. So are we saying sometimes the storage compartments gets overloaded? Yes, we are. So memory is not like a perfect processor. It's affected by many factors. This can be interfering with the information coding or the stored information or how fast the information is retrieved, or pain, as well as some of the physical conditions, which I'll kind of briefly talk about here. They have done a lot of studies with animals and realized that pain can interfere with memory. And we know that pain can be emotional, psychological, mental, relationship, physical, or kind of just perceived pain which doesn't exist. And I think we talked a little bit about that at some point. I'll talk about pain at a later stage. However, if you recall, I started by talking to you about the neuron, right? So the neuron is called a cell. Our bodies has like trillions of cells, maybe 79 trillion cells or more, depending on how many parasites are inside our bodies. Some people have more because they're invaders, parasites. So this little neuron is the cell, is the smallest living component of the nervous system, which is the brain and its nerves, the brain and the wires, right? So I want you to just close your eyes and envision this little cell trying to stay alive, right? So in order for the neurons to have good health and to fire properly, they gotta get the nutrients, the oxygen, and the chemicals have to be balanced, right? So one of the problems is reduced oxygen. That's the biggest problem, because if there's not enough oxygen going to the brain, either because the heart is not beating right, or breathing is not efficient, or someone is stopping breathing for too long, there's no air. The whole body functions like that. When air is limited, the cells die, right? The other one is nutrition, not eating proper nutrition, stress, mental health, infections, surgeries, and so forth. And diseases like a stroke. A stroke results in lack of oxygen. So I want to pause here for a moment. Picture this. This is part of the brain, it's cut in half, right? Every single part of the brain has a specific role. Lower here next to the neck, you see we say cerebellum. That is the apparatus which is responsible for balance, for breathing, stuff like that. Then you see the visual cortex, that's vision. Parietal lobe, hearing. Somatosensory, that's what all the senses from our feeling and our movement is going, the feeling, sensomato, like feelings from the body, hands, and so forth. Then you have the premotor cortex, that's movement. Then you have the premotor area, the frontal lobe. And I want to share this because this part of the brain, which is called the frontal lobe, is the center for decision making. It helps us make wise decisions. So when it comes to memory, sometimes it's a matter of a chicken and egg. Is it the memory loss which led to somebody not making a decision? Or is it because they made a bad decision of eating what's not healthy for them and now they have issues with memory? I'm not here judging anyone, but I just wanted you to consider taking care of your neurons when you live here, because this brain can only function better if it's taken care of well. I did mention some conditions which may exist. I will give you an example, like multiple sclerosis, right? Multiple sclerosis. It's a condition which affects the nerves. Sometimes there's patchy areas in the brain, memory is affected. I'll give you another example of a condition which you all might know, dementia or Alzheimer's. Yes, the brain, white matter is affected. Parkinson's, it's a chemical imbalance which leads in demyelination of the neurons. Punch drunk dementia, which happens when somebody is in boxing and got a lot of trauma to the head. So I'm here to say that anytime there's physical trauma, chemical trauma, nutritional deficiencies, no oxygen flowing to the brain, there's a problem. However, I also want you to remember this. The brain is just not responsible for thinking. The brain is responsible for controlling, right? Because the nerves come from the brain to control the internal organs. If you're afraid somebody just bangs at your door right now, your heart will start racing. You don't have to think about it. It's natural. It's part of the process. How we respond to our environment. Remember, I talked about somatosensory. So information which is coming from all these organs go to the same brain. So you must be thinking, oh, so if there's congestion, a lot of mixed messages coming from all these organs, the brain gets suffocated? Yes, it does, right? So anytime the lungs are not working well, oxygen is going to be reduced to the brain. Anytime the heart is malfunctioning, oxygen is going to be reduced to most body parts anyhow. Anytime the rib cage is not expanding, oxygen can be affected. Anytime the liver is not cleaning the toxins out of the body, oxygen delivery is affected. Anytime the digestive system is not absorbing the nutrients well, the brain is going to be affected. Anytime the stomach is not digesting very well, it's an issue. The kidneys are not filtering, it's an issue. So I'm not here to make this complicated. This whole forgetfulness, amnesia, impaired memory, loss of memory or syndrome of loss or mild impairment, memory loss. If anyone is here today who's experiencing such symptoms, identify the root cause, what's causing it, seek professional help, right? And so when you seek professional help, they will do some blood tests, specific blood tests. Sometimes there's lack of vitamin B12 or thyroid disease. I'm not going to do a nutritional class here, but I'll talk about that at some point, the nutritional deficiencies in a different session. So when there's not enough vitamins and nutrients in our body, the body struggles to maintain normal blood glucose level, for instance, or oxygen levels. So the brain is affected. So when you see someone with a thyroid disease, you've known people who have like a bulge in their neck. It's called a goiter. Sometimes that's a sign that somebody has thyroid disease. Sometimes it's not there. Somebody is failing to maintain a good weight. They have excessive weight loss or they have excessive weight gain. The thyroid malfunctions quite a bit. It's one of the problems. So if that's the case, the body will struggle with maintaining normal blood glucose level, which is sugar. The brain gets its energy from starch, sugar, glucose, stuff like that. Too much of it is not good, and lack of it affects the brain thought processes. So these are the tests are done, like checking the blood flow, which is cerebral angiography, cognitive tests, which is just more psychometric tests to see how somebody's processing information. Then you have CT scans and MRIs of the head to really see if the matter of the brain is intact. You have EEGs, which is an electrical signals of the brain to see how the signals are going. Then you have a lumbar puncture, which is checking the fluid around the spinal cord. They stick at the bottom of the back there and suck some fluid out, because the fluid which surrounds the spinal cord also surrounds the brain. It's called cerebrospinal fluid, looking for infections. So I might forget this. You've all heard about sexual transmitted diseases, STDs, syphilis, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and the cousins. I'm not talking about HIV, I'm talking about those. Sometimes those infections travel through the blood to the brain as well. And I'm not just singling that. You've all heard about some other infections too, which are found in water. You've heard about tapeworms and ringworms and stuff like that. Sometimes those things travel through the blood and end up in the brain. Sometimes people can have issues with the brain because they have parasites in their bloodstream as well. So I just want to say this is a broad subject. I'm not saying anyone who's forgetful is because of these causes, but I'm saying if there is a need, get tested. So I want to land here by talking about lifestyle changes. You've all heard about the New Start, right? Some of these mild memory issues can be addressed with proper nutrition. Proper nutrition means the body is getting vitamins, minerals, and a little bit of starch, enough protein, so that the cells are healthy in general. Because sometimes issues of the memory come with other issues too. Like somebody might have acid reflux and they are having problem forgetting, remembering things because their body is not absorbing nutrients well. So nutrition is a subject we'll talk about on another day. But this New Start program is a well-known program which is in the Adventist health systems, created in Loma Linda in the US, in California. Anybody can Google New Start and know what I'm talking about. I like to use the acronym New Start because it's like a starting point for someone. Nutrition, nourishing the brain, exercise. Okay, so I wanted to just highlight this. So when we are sitting like we are doing now at rest, the pulse in the heart is very low. For most people, it's as low as 54 if you're young, or 50 or 60. If you're older, you're in the 80s or 70s. If you think about it, the heart is in the chest, the brain is upstairs, right? So for blood to go all the way to the brain, the heart has to pump with a lot of pressure, right? Makes sense, you know, from a gravity point of view and the upright posture point of view. One of the challenges we face as a generation, period, is we don't move enough. to make that blood pressure high enough so blood can flow efficiently. And I'm not saying running or doing all kind of stuff, but we need to move enough for the heart to pump blood with force enough so that blood goes to all the vital organs, and the brain is a vital organ. So I think I gave the formula here 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. That's important. You need to move. And then water. Water is actually the only liquid which the body needs. I don't know why adults drink cow's milk personally, but with water, the body can have a medium to transport oxygen, nutrients, and so forth. The sugary drinks are one of our enemies because that sugary drink, too much sugar is just poison to the brain because the brain doesn't need that much sugar. So if you're consuming like a sugary drink, I would recommend replace it with water. You can't go wrong, unless if you have a prescription from a doctor to drink Coca-Cola or Torino or Sprite or Mountain Dew. Water would help. Yeah. So these three things I just talked about help with what I'm going to call microcirculation, right? I talked about these nerves, these little electric wires, right? So these little electric wires and everything else in the body have tiny, tiny little blood vessels, small, small arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, and veins return blood back to the heart, with the exception of the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary artery, which is to the lungs. So the arteries are carrying oxygen. So what good nutrition, exercise, and water does, it allows the little arteries to stay open. So with these microvascular conditions is where these little arteries are getting clogged. So most people have clogged arteries. If that happens in the eye, you can't see properly. If that happens in the brain, you lose some of the functions. If that happens in the foot, you lose circulation. Sometimes people get sores which don't heal. So the new part, the way to remember this is to open up the little blood vessels so blood can flow, so that the electrical wires will get the nutrients they need, the oxygen they need, and the water, which is also carrying back the toxins out of the brain and any other body part back into the circulation to go back to the heart, so the heart can pump it around again to get oxygen and so forth and so forth. So that's life. That's what life is. Life is about good blood circulating. If you read Ellen G. White's books, for those of you who know her books, she actually talks about this very well, like a scientist. She said certain foods do not produce good blood. All it means is blood is not healthy. So I want to talk about sunshine here. So I did talk about vitamin B12. There's vitamin D, which is needed. The sun helps the skin to produce vitamin D and melatonin, which is part of melanin, which is part of the skin pigment, which makes our skin darker or lighter, depending on, the darker your skin is, the more sun you need. It's needed because without this mechanism working, most people are vitamin D deficiency. They have vitamin D deficiency. You can get a blood work done because we don't go outside. We stay indoors all the time now. And so a lot of us don't get sunshine. But sunshine is very important because if the body doesn't have melatonin, you can't get deep sleep. So the brain doesn't rest enough. I'm making it just simple here. Also, the reason why I like the New Start is that these 8 things here, these 8 of them, these are natural remedies. These are natural remedies which can help you heal. If you do every single one of these, you'll find that your well-being gets better. Trust in God. Trust anyhow, period. Most of us don't trust anything. We doubt everything. We question everything. When you trust that you make this change or you implement some of the strategies we're going to talk about, you begin to see results. They did some tests, several times they're always doing these tests several years ago, where they had two groups, people split in two groups. One group was given a drug, they call it placebo. The other group was given a sugar pill. They found out that even the people who got the sugar pill reported getting better. It's called placebo effect. And the opposite of that is nocebo effect. So placebo is positive, nocebo is negative. If anybody lives here and say, oh, she talked about the sun, I don't see how that sun is going to help me. It's definitely not going to help you. But if somebody say, I'm really going to try and get my 30 minutes of walking and I'll be outside, you experience a change. It lifts your mood, it improves your memory. Fresh air. Obviously, fresh air has to do with a lot of what I've talked about already. Oxygen comes from plants, and plants are outdoors for most of us. So if we don't get fresh air, we are breathing stale air. Most of the homes which have been around for years and years and years, inside there's a lot of toxins which come from the carpets, the paints on the wall are deteriorating, the dust from the dust which enters through the vents. So the best air is outside. They recommend you put a plant, one plant for every 100 square feet. They're called indoor plants. They clean the air. There are different types like peace lily, mother-in-law's tongue, and all these other plants. So for those who can't go outside, it's recommended. So let's talk about rest. So rest is physical rest, mental rest, spiritual rest. Our bodies are created with a cycle, 7-day cycle of rest. If your body is not in sync with resting, you're going to have problems. Rest also means resting from things which stimulates our brain. Resting also means that you find a place where you can establish balance. So how you perceive rest depends on what your belief system is or where you are, but find time to rest. Rest doesn't mean I'm on my phone and I'm playing video games or I'm watching my favorite movies. No, because this brain requires some form of rest. So that's why sometimes listening to calming music or listening to the birds tends to be a better rest than watching your favorite movie. Then temperance. Temperance is self-control. Everything I've talked about here in moderation. And self-control also means how we respond to situations. It matters. So for those of you who want some personal strategies, ensure you have a life-work balance. Think about your spiritual needs, physical needs, mental needs, social needs, psychological needs, financial needs, and relationship, and create a balance. Because when we neglect any one of these, the brain is constantly processing. And sometimes it takes a session like this, finding time to come here on Sunday and just hang out and just learn something and say, hey, I'm going to go in and plug in. We are spiritual beings first. We are not physical. We're spiritual beings first. And if we don't have that foundation of trust and belief, it's kind of hard to do any of the other things which are listed here. It's hard. I mean, we can plug into social media or we can see a mental health counselor, but if you don't really have like grounded in a system which you believe, it's hard. I'm a believer of God, so I openly share that. I don't know, people might have a different belief system who are here, but believing, trusting is the beginning of everything. So we will say, here we are. If anyone here wants to improve their memory, consider connecting the dots of what we talked about. Think about your brain and the little wires, the little electrical wires which are plugged in. Yes, sometimes these wires have been exposed to trauma or injustice or unfairness or poor nutrition in the past, but they're still here. Every 90 days, on average, the body produces new cells. It only does that while we are growing. As we get older, we lose more cells than we build. So for those of you who are young, take care of these wires, this brain and these cells. Lifestyle change, definitely, it's a positive. I'm a proponent of plant-based eating. I believe in nutrients coming from plants. And I also believe in the Bible, Genesis 1, verse 29. And I also know that there's a lot of science which has confirmed this. You can Google a lot of things on YouTube and find out what I'm talking about. There are people who have recovered from major strokes and stuff like that because they started eating healthier. It all boils down to, is blood flowing and is oxygen going? Wherever blood is not going and oxygen is not there, there's a problem. Tissue dies. So to improve memory, we need not to look further than what we can do every day. I just put the vegetables here, but it's not the only solution. When you think about all these body parts of the brain, you're also thinking, okay, what about stress, right? So what stress does, it makes the body produce more sugar, hold on to sugar, because sugar is needed to be fired up. And so stress clogs the arteries. Sugar clogs the arteries. And so stress is one of those factors. Most of us know that when you're going through a stressful time or a relationship issue which is not balanced, you forget certain things, you neglect yourself. So I want all of us to consider taking charge of our health. I mentioned earlier that we have a portal. I will share it in the group where you can access some of the information we've shared in the past and some of the information we're sharing now, just for free. So you can work on where you are in life and make decisions which serve you, and place you at a place where you're taking charge of your health, because it becomes a vicious cycle here. You forget, and then you make decisions. And sometimes depression sits in, and sometimes decisions are made which don't really serve you. And so to me, I like to just make it practical here and say, well, does it really matter where you've been? It doesn't really matter what you've been through. What matters is you're here. So when you're here, I stop sharing my screen. When you're here, you realize that you're present. And I'm a proponent of we're present, we are here, we are breathing, we are talking. What I'm going to say is this: from this day on, try and avoid things which damages the little wires, okay? I know sometimes as young people or as adults, we like to experiment, right? Experimenting with things can range from smoking a little something or drinking a little something or social decisions, right? And if anyone out there is sexually active, use protection, because just a simple infection can end up in your brain, because that's the problem. That's why STDs are a big deal, because they do affect the brain. They cause nerve damage. So we are here now. I'm going to stop this recording so that you can ask me questions, but I'm so happy you joined us. Thank you.